My name is Olivia. 7 years. That's how long I poured my soul into a marriage I believed could weather any storm, navigate any complexity, even the intricate, often misunderstood, landscape of autism. When Mark walked into my life, I was 25, brimming with a hopeful sort of idealism. He was 30, a fascinating blend of sharp intellect and a disarmingly direct way of seeing the world. He was also, as he told me with unvarnished honesty on one of our first dates, autistic, a diagnosis he'd received in adulthood. I didn't flinch. If anything, it drew me closer. I saw not a label, but a unique mind, a refreshingly unfiltered perspective in a world signal of pretense. I embraced the challenges he laid out, the potential for social misunderstandings, his need for routine, his different way of processing emotions, with an open heart and a fierce determination to understand. For 5 of those 7 years, we were husband and wife. I dove headfirst into his world. I devoured books on autism, spent countless hours combing at forums connecting with other partners, and meticulously adjusted my own communication style. I learned to be explicit, to say exactly what I meant, to sidestep the nuanced dance of subtext that he often missed. I learned to respect his need for solitude, the quiet spaces where he recharged from the sensory overload of the neurotypical world. I took pride in my patience, in the bridge of understanding I was so painstakingly trying to build between his world and mine. There were moments, beautiful and clear, where I felt we were a team, 2 souls against a world that didn't always get it, and I loved him for it. For his raw honesty, his sometimes clumsy attempts at affection, the unique way his mind worked. But then, things began to shift. Or perhaps, the cracks that were always there began to widen, too large for even my determined optimism to paper over. It started subtly, with comments that felt like tiny, almost unnoticeable, paper cuts. "You looked thinner before you started that new job," he'd remark, his eyes fixed on his laptop, his tone flat, analytical. I'd force a smile, chalking it up to his characteristic bluntness. But the paper cuts kept coming, more frequently, a little deeper each time. "Babe, you should really work out. Dropping some weight would do you good." That one landed while I was twirling in a new dress, a rare surge of self-confidence deflating like a pricked balloon. I tried to talk to him gently at first. "Mark, when you say things like that, it hurts my feelings." He'd look up, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. Confusion? Annoyance? "I'm just being honest," he'd reply, a slight edge to his voice. "I'm autistic. I don't do fake compliments." And then came the line that would become his shield, his all-purpose deflection. "You're trying to police how I communicate. That's ableist." Ableist. The word hit me like a physical blow every time. It was a trump card, shutting down any attempt I made to express my pain. Me, who had dedicated years to understanding and accommodating his needs, now accused of being discriminatory. The injustice of it coiled in my stomach, a bitter pill I was forced to swallow again and again. I began to doubt myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I unfairly expecting him to be someone he wasn't? The comments about my appearance escalated, becoming more personal, more cutting. "I'm not as attracted to you when you've gained weight," he stated one evening, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. Or, "Other women your age seem to care more about how they look." Each word was a tiny erosion of my self-worth. I started to dread getting dressed, to scrutinize my reflection with a critical eye I'd never had before. The kitchen, once a place of shared meals and laughter, became a battleground of internal calorie counting and guilty thoughts. It wasn't just the words. Mark's fuse grew shorter. The smallest deviation from a plan, a misplaced item, could trigger an outburst. Not a neurotypical meltdown, but a sharp, cold anger that left me reeling. And if I dared to cry, to show any emotional response to his criticisms or his temper, I was met with a blank stare or a dismissive, "You're being too emotional," or "You're overreacting again." Once, at a gathering with his friends, after I'd spent hours getting ready, hoping for a pleasant evening, Mark made a particularly unflattering comment about my body. It was loud enough for a few of his friends to overhear, and a snicker rippled through the small group. Humiliation washed over me in a hot wave, and I fled to the bathroom, tears stinging my eyes. Mark followed, not to comfort me, but to hiss, "You're embarrassing me. It was just a joke." Every attempt I made to hold him accountable, to explain the profound hurt his actions were causing, was met with the same wall, his autism. "I don't regulate emotions like you do," he'd say, his voice devoid of any inflection. Or, "You're expecting neurotypical behavior, and that's unfair to me." I felt trapped, as if my own feelings were invalid, my experiences irrelevant, simply because he was autistic. My love for him was still there, a stubborn ember refusing to be extinguished, but it was suffocating under a thick blanket of confusion, resentment, and a gnawing loneliness. I started to wonder, with a sickening lurch in my gut, if this truly was the reality of being married to someone with autism, or if something else, something uglier, was at play. Then I started noticing something strange, something that didn't quite fit the narrative he'd so carefully constructed. At his work functions, or when we were around certain friends he deemed important, Mark was a different person. He was charming, articulate, even witty. He navigated social situations with a surprising grace, his tone perfectly modulated, his comments carefully considered. He could be the epitome of politeness, deflecting awkward questions with ease, making people laugh. This was a Mark I rarely, if ever, saw at home. When I tentatively pointed this out, he had a ready explanation. "That's masking," he said, a touch of weariness in his voice. "I have to work incredibly hard to appear normal in those situations. It's exhausting. Home is supposed to be the one place I can take off the mask, where I can just be myself." It made sense at first. I knew masking was a real and draining experience for many autistic individuals. But the more I observed, the more a chilling realization began to dawn. The himself he was at home wasn't just relaxed, it was often callous and dismissive of my feelings. The contrast between the Mark who could perform and the Mark who refused to try with me was too stark. It wasn't that he couldn't control his words or his temper. It was that, with me, he chose not to. My feelings, it seemed, weren't important enough to warrant even a fraction of the effort he extended to near strangers. That thought was a cold shower, washing away the last vestiges of my denial. The final straw came on an ordinary Tuesday evening last month. I was tired from a long day, hoping for a quiet dinner, a moment of peace. Instead, I was met with a comment about my body so cruel, so gratuitously unkind, that something inside me simply snapped. I won't repeat the words here. They still echo in my mind, sharp and venomous. It wasn't bluntness. It was a deliberate, calculated barb designed to wound. That night, there were no tears, no arguments, just a profound, hollow emptiness. I looked at Mark, the man I had loved so deeply, the man I had built my life around, and I didn't recognize him. Or rather, I finally saw him for who he truly was, stripped mechanism of the autism diagnosis he wielded like a shield. The next morning, I packed my bags. The sound of the suitcase wheels mechanism the hardwood floor was a desolate, final sound, like a door slamming shut on a significant chapter of my life. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand. News of my departure spread like wildfire, and then Mark's version of the story began to circulate among our mutual friends. In his telling, I was the shallow, intolerant wife who couldn't handle the realities of being married to someone with a disability. I had abandoned him because he was autistic. Friends who had once praised my patience who had admired my commitment, now looked at me with a mixture of pity for Mark and a subtle, unspoken judgment for me. "Poor Mark," I'd hear whispered. She just couldn't cope with his autism. My heart ached with the injustice of it. I had no tangible proof to counter the carefully curated narrative Mark was spinning, a narrative that painted him as the victim and me as the villain. All I had was my truth, a truth now buried under layers of misinformation and misunderstanding. They hadn't seen the private tears, the desperate, unheard pleas for kindness, the slow, agonizing erosion of my spirit. They only saw a normal woman leaving a disabled man. But now, sitting alone in my small, new apartment, surrounded by a sea of unpacked boxes, another truth, a stronger, clearer truth, is taking root. I didn't leave Mark because he was autistic. Countless autistic individuals lead lives filled with kindness, empathy, and respectful relationships. They navigate their challenges with courage and a willingness to learn and grow, especially with those they love. I left a man who used his diagnosis not as an explanation for his struggles, but as an excuse for his cruelty, as a license for emotional abuse, as a way to systematically dismantle my self-esteem and gaslight me into silence. I left not because I couldn't handle autism, but because I could no longer allow myself to be his emotional punching bag, to be the repository for his bitterness and disdain. Perhaps leaving was the only truly ableist thing I did. I refused to accept that his autism gave him a free pass to treat me with contempt. And for that, I have no regrets. I am at the beginning of a long journey, a journey to reclaim myself, to rebuild the confidence that was so insidiously chipped away. It may be a lonely path at times, fraught with the lingering sting of misunderstanding, but it is mine. And in this new space, my feelings are valid, my voice matters, and I can finally breathe, truly breathe, without fear of the next cutting remark, the next dismissive wave of his hand. I'm no longer waiting for him to see me. I'm finally starting to see myself again.